Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman. And before we get going on today's very special podcast, I want to let you all know that we just finished our series, The New Man, and we are getting ready to restart and reboot our podcast with new guest hosts and co-hosts, new format, new music. We're really excited. In the meantime, for this week and next week, I'm going to be talking to Dustin about what's going on in the Ukraine. We felt it was important enough to stop and give our take through the Soul Focus Group lens, using our technology to discuss what's going on. So sit back. We hope you find this interesting. And here we go. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. This is your host, Martin Friedman, and I'm joined today by Dustin. Dustin, how you doing?
Hey, Martin, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Dustin. Just living life and experiencing everything as it's happening, and excited to always to get the opportunity to talk to you as our vice president, our COO. And it's not a happy occasion that we're talking this time, but I think it's a very important time for us to have this conversation.
No doubt about that.
Yeah. So let's jump in. I'm really interested in your take. And you know what, actually, Dustin, let's in the moment, let's kind of pivot a little bit, even though we're going to enter into sort of a heavy area. Well, the way we've been starting all of our podcasts lately is to really talk about something that's going on in our lives that we're celebrating. So what are you celebrating in your life right now that you want to share with our listeners?
There's so many things I'm celebrating. I just got back from the East Coast visiting my grandparents, and it's always the best experience for me. Being in New Jersey, then definitely being with my grandparents. When I turn on the street that I grew up on, my heart gets full. And just being with them too, they in many ways were my parents growing up, pretty much in every way. My grandmother just asked, "What do you love about us so much?" And they're just warm, kind, loving people who always accepted me just for who I am. Always felt protected and safe with them. And that's exactly how I feel right now. And, my grandfather, when he retired from the military, my mom went back to finish her senior year of college. And so my grandfather kept me that first year. So I was a son he never had. And our bond is just super special. And he's been there for me in all the important ways. My sporting events growing up, he was always there, just bringing me lunch money every day to my mom's house. And he loves me unconditionally. And the connection I feel with him is just so beautiful. And so, the hardest thing is leaving them and leaving New Jersey, which, is where my heart is in many ways. I mean, I love Seattle. I love a lot about the Northwest, but I'm a Jersey boy.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me and our listeners. And, for me, I think what I'm celebrating today is that, I'm part of a family, my immediate family, Felicia and Maya, who've both been on this podcast. I'm celebrating that I have a family that we can really support each other through, through mistakes, through different emotions and different things going on, and that we always come back together and figure out how it can be a growth experience for all of us. So I'm just really holding that right now. That to me is something that's very, it's special. I've been a part of a lot of different family units and in many different ways. And I've had, a lot of great experiences. And I think one of the things for me, Dustin, is I've had a hard time recovering from mistakes, from my own mistakes and other people's mistakes. And so I'm really celebrating that, we had some stuff come up in my family over the last couple of days. And, pretty quickly we were able to get our equilibrium back and ground our relationship in love, support, forgiveness, understanding. And so I'm just really celebrating that right now.
That's really beautiful, Martin. I mean, given, how we're socialized in this world, we're not supposed to practice forgiveness, reconciliation, and really seeing people for who they truly are and not for what they show in any given moment. So it's really beautiful to hear. And of course, I've seen your growth, and I know Felicia and Maya super well.
Yes,
their family as well. So, three beautiful people. So that makes me happy to hear not only what you've achieved for your family, but also how you are modeling for other people.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, you're a huge part of us and what we do. And, you and I talk every day, and you're always there to support me through what I'm going through and vice versa. And, Dustin, we talk so much about ego, right?
Right.
And I think just in what you and I both shared, what we really talked about is we talk about ego and authentic self, right? We talk about moving from ego to power. We talk about that a lot. And what you and I both just talked about is being able to see people past ego, past our egos, their egos, and to really be able to connect with their true and authentic selves. That's what you talked about with your grandparents. That's what I talked about with Maya and Felicia. And, so much of what's happening in the world, what's always happening in the world, but really what's happening specifically right now with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine is like centered around ego, just like ego out of control, ego run amok. Maybe that's a good starting point, for you to really just, tell me, what have your observations been? How are you seeing ego specifically play out in this
Yeah.
conflict?
Yeah. So much of my analysis around this is really looking at this from a historical context. And so what Russia is doing to Ukraine, to the nation of Ukraine, is no different than what the United States has done in Iraq, no different than what the United States has done in Libya. It's a cycle of a psychology of domination, which is, as you just said, very much rooted in ego. Anytime we seek to have power over other people, that means we're coming from our egoic mind. And that is very much rooted in the third density history of this world, and very much rooted in the history of what have been called superpowers. So whether that be Russia, or formerly the Soviet Union, the United States of America, and then other empires from Rome to the United Kingdom, there has been a egoic psychology of power over. And so I've been really fascinated with the psychology of the leaders and understanding that, for me, essentially, when the war started the first night, I was watching the news, watching CNN, and which is problematic in itself. We can talk about that. But watching CNN, it just really hit me at a depth that I've never felt before, that these people are mad, that they are willing to kill people, women, men, children, elderly, send their own people to be killed just to have power over, when there is no justifiable cause to engage in war right now. This is solely about Putin's sense of history, how the Soviet or the Russian Empire should be constructed, and a lot of fear of NATO, fear of the Western powers. And not to say, the Western powers are equally as violent as Russia is. And so don't want to paint anyone as the good and the bad. It's all oppositional to what humanity, how we ought to be as human beings. So egos run through and through the decisions that the folks in power are making. And I want to say equally, ego is happening on the Western side as well. It's not just Putin who's locked in the egoic mindset.
Right. Absolutely. Talk a little bit about how you see it playing out on the Western side, because I'm so glad you brought up, us against them, because that's one of the ways I really see this playing out egoically. And, us against them allows us, like you just said, to not see how we perpetuate the same thing. And by we, I mean America or the West. But talk a little bit about how you see specifically ego playing out for the West on this side.
Folks who are in power positions are making moral decisions. They're making calculated political decisions around what's going to ultimately benefit. So if you think about, Russia is a producer of natural gas and oil and has supplied much of Europe with natural gas and oil. And so there is a calculated decision that by being able to put these sanctions on Russia because they invaded Ukraine, that's going to open up opportunities for Western nations to begin to, specifically the United States, to take the place of Russia in terms of supplying natural gas and oil. And so there's a win-win. So, we externally, our propaganda in the media will be, we don't want there to be an invasion of the Ukraine, but there is a concerted economic interest by American forces, American corporations that will stand to benefit from this. So if you think about that kind of cold calculation, that they're willing to have people die and people suffer for economic benefit. Now, that's not a discourse you're going to hear on CNN. That's not a discourse you're going to hear on Fox News or MSNBC, but that's absolutely at the table. And that's part of the mental sickness that ego creates.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see, in the way you just laid it out is awesome, and and informative. And we talk a lot of times about this disconnect and not being able to see people's true humanity, and literally what ego does, and what I'm seeing in this particular war that's happening, and the way that you just laid it out on both sides, is that the different valuing human beings' lives differently, like giving a different value to the life of a human being. So like we're willing to sacrifice certain human beings so that there can be a profit, or we're willing to sacrifice certain human beings, for this power over gain. And that's really ego personified, isn't it? To say that there's a different value of human life, different value of human worth based on, the nationality of that person, or the class of that person, or all the different things.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's part of the inflation of ego, that we are somehow better than someone else, and also the diminishing of the humanity of other people. And, so you think about, I remember when the Iraq war happened, the second Iraq war under George W. Bush, and how many people were killed during the initial phase of the war through shock and awe, and how Americans were celebrating the war, how you could feel almost a sexual energy from the newscasters as they were talking about the shock and awe, with no sense of the terror of the people, the human beings of Iraq must be feeling. We would talk about it in a cold and clinical way, as if they were not human beings anymore. And so, as a father, I can't imagine what that would be like, having my children, let alone myself, in a city that was being bombed in the way we bombed Iraq, or the way Russia is currently bombing. And they're using weapons right now that are literally sucking the oxygen out of the air, out of the lungs of people, and causing people to be incinerated. I mean, they're using awful, awful weapons, and we are detached. Our egos will detach. And I'm not just saying the leaders, I'm saying those of us who are consuming the war on television and social media. We can often not feel any human connection to what is happening. And somehow we end up seeing the people of Iraq, or the people of Ukraine, or even the Russian people as different human beings. And some people are worthy of death based on the messages that we receive, which by and large is of no critical analysis of our own. These are just state offered propaganda messages to justify what is ultimately the corporate interest and those who really run the country.
Yeah, I saw that weapon that you're talking about. I mean, it's, the fact that that's where we're putting our technological advances, where we're putting scientists on this to just figure out how to kill more people more effectively. It's just insane, right? I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah. And so Martin, the whole notion of profit over people is absolutely born from an egoic mind. And so you think about this. So now we're going to enter into what is essentially going to be the second phase of the Cold War. And so this is going to drive an increase in military budgets, guarantee you, not just in the United States, but across the world, which is being calculated and pushed by the military industrial complex for profit, because we're not going to be selling, weapons just to the United States government, the military industrial complex, but they'll be selling weapons systems across the world because of the now new Russian threat. And so Rahm Emanuel said it very clearly: never waste politically, they would say never waste a good opportunity, right? And so they're going to make the most of this moment. And these decisions, the decisions that we hear from our elected leaders, are not the real decisions that are being made behind closed doors in the situation room, and in meetings with the highest levels of power in government.
Right. It's kind of overwhelming, right? And I think one of the things. Well, there's a lot I want to talk to you about that you brought up, and before I go to that overwhelming part, I wanted to spend a little more time in, a concept that we talk about at Soul Focus Group, which is that vampire syndrome, which you already sort of brought up, right? Like you can't see yourself in someone else. You can't treat somebody this way if you see yourself in them, right? You can't annihilate them. You can't create something that's going to incinerate them if you see yourself in them. Like you said, talk about your own family, your own children. Like you could never imagine doing these things. So I just really I'm holding the level of disconnect from our own humanity. Like how disconnected from your own humanity do you have to be? And I want to just make sure this ties into, this is so much deeper than just a war that's happening in Europe, thousands of miles from here. But this is really what we talk about all the time, Dustin. This is the root of the problems with racism, that white folks couldn't see themselves in people of color, and in the attempted annihilation of indigenous people, and chattel and real estate slavery, transatlantic slave trade, all of those things that we talk about all the time. You can't do those things if you see yourself in other people. So this is happening all over. This ego sickness is happening all over. It's happening right now in terms of the division that we have, where the left can't see themselves in the right can't in the left, the vaxxers can't see themselves in the anti-vaxxers, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just a very intense example of something that exists, that we see a lot, like every day here in America.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's it's part of the historical playbook. As long as we keep people divided and work to diminish one group's humanity and lift up someone else's humanity, we can have people at odds. And ultimately that leads to the ability for a very small group of folks to control the masses of the people. But, as you talked about the fact that this is overwhelming, and I know the world can seem overwhelming for a lot of people. But one of the things we can begin to do, so if we look at Ukraine and the psychology of the leaders that led to the conflict in Ukraine and lead to the other global conflicts that we see, that same energy, that same psychology that's happening at that level, many of us are exhibiting at the levels in which we exist. And so I would argue, and I know you would argue as well, that the energy of Putin invading the Ukraine is no different than the energy of, we just read an article not too long ago about in the Mississippi prison system that certain prisoners are controlling the masses of the prisoners' access to food, whether they can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? That's no different. Right. That's the same level of control. When we think about the violence that we see on our streets, all across this country, I mean, like Seattle right now, is off the charts in terms of homicides, shootings, stabbings, robberies, all that kind of stuff. Same as everywhere else, Philly, Chicago, New York. I mean, same madness is happening all across this country. That's no different than what Putin's doing in the Ukraine. The gossip in the office, the daily gossip we have, that's the same energy. But it will be intoxicating for us to focus on what's happening globally. And it's not an either or. We need to focus on what's happening globally. But the existential question for all of us ought to be, where am I exhibiting this egoic energy of power over, of control, right? Of violence, whether it's violence of language, violence of emotional violence, violence of physical violence. Where am I participating in that? Where am I glorifying that, right? Because we will glorify violence. We had a podcast not too long ago where me, you, Felicia, and Madi were talking about football. We glorify violence all the time. It's a slippery slope from the football field to the battlefield.
It is. I appreciate you saying that, because it's in our everyday life, right? And so, I think the theme that I'm getting is like this idea of disconnect. So we can disconnect and say, oh, what Putin is doing or what the Russians are doing is so horrible and so bad, and yet we don't reflect on what we're doing and how we're part of it. And the one thing I wanted to add, because it's a theme with us at Soul Focus Group, is we also see it in the social justice movement. We also see it in the anti-racist movement, that that we're trying to exert power over people. The cancel culture movement. Those are all exerting power over people. None of it is meeting people where they are, and none of it is seeing yourself and other people. And so I agree with you 100%. That, one of the things that we have to do, that we're being mandated to do right now, is to check ourselves and not to see this as something that we're disconnected from, or that's external or outside of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, Martin. I I mean, if we're ever going to truly heal our world and transform our world from the current state to one of love, then we are all going to have to be able to do a level of self-reflection. I mean, because the truth is, as a collective, in recovery, we talk about hitting bottom, as individuals. But as a collective, we've been at the bottom for a long time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we've just normalized this way of treating each other. But this moment, as pretty much every moment, is another opportunity for us as collectives and as individuals to be able to ask the next level of critical questions. So if I am so opposed to what I see in the Ukraine, where is that energy, that psychology that led to this invasion? Where is that in me? And how am I exhibiting those type of behaviors? Me and you right now today, we have no individual sway over what is happening with Russia and Ukraine. But what we can begin to do is, in our worlds where we have influence and impact, begin to course correct how we are living. And so whether you talk about cancel culture, which is just being in a place of righteous judgment of people. And the truth is, everybody could be canceled for something. There is something for everyone. And so how long are we going to live or allow for a way of human interacting that allows us to throw someone else away? Because that's essentially, what we do with the people of, that we attack. So again, going back to the U.S. and Iraq, we deem those people as terrorists. And so they're worthy of death. That's what we do on a individual level in our day-to-day interactions with each other. So much of that is happening across humanity.
Yeah. So, what I hear you saying, Dustin, and I agree with this 100%, is that, I mean, the only way we can start to make a shift at all is to control what we can control, and understand that, as we make shifts in being able to see ourselves in other people and to not be perpetuating power over, then that, that is in effect doing something. I know most of the people listening are going to be like, that's so esoteric, or that's so out there. And, how is that going to save lives in the Ukraine? And, I guess what I would do, Dustin, and what I would say is to challenge people to be outside of the normal way that we think of things. When I say normal, I mean the programmed way that we think about things, because we're programmed to feel overwhelmed. We're programmed to feel like we don't have any control. And we're programmed to focus on things that are happening in other parts of the world that, we literally can't affect in the moment. So that keeps us from, controlling what we can't control and starting to shift energetically the way we walk through the world and how that impacts the people that we come in contact with every day.
No, that's absolutely right, Martin. We are vibrational beings. We are energy. And as we shift, everything else starts to shift around us. The thing that I learned on my recovery journey, the most important thing that we can do is to clean up our side of the street and make sure we are showing up, not just with our words, but how we are seeking to live in the smallest of interactions, in the shadows, in the nighttime when no one else can see. How are we talking to ourselves? How are we talking to our children? Yeah. How are we talking to our friends? How are we talking to our partners? How are we talking to our colleagues? How are we judging other people? And all that energy has reverberates throughout the world. And so, again, it's so easy to want to point the finger at someone else. And again, it's not an either or conversation. That does not mean that we don't condemn what Putin is doing, but it's also critically important that we begin to turn the mirror back towards ourselves, because anything we see in someone else on some level, and anything we see in disdain in someone else on some level, that is inside of us. We recognize it because it's somewhere inside of us. It may be latent, maybe buried deep in our groundwater, in our subconscious or unconscious mind, but it's a part of us. And it's our job to clean up that part of ourselves. So, and I will tell you, Martin, we've tried there's a lot of marching and protesting happening, and, a lot of discourse across social media, but that's we've done that a million times. That's not going to stop the violence that is happening. But if we are so concerned about the violence in Ukraine, which many people, again, for example, are in Seattle, how are we relating to the violence that's happening right here on our own block, in our own homes, right, inside of ourselves? And until we start to do that level of work, we will have another Ukraine and another Ukraine and another Ukraine. And we will just, feel overwhelmed yet again.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it feels like, well, it doesn't feel like it is such a setup. It's such a self perpetuating cycle at this point of that, disconnect and that hopelessness and that overwhelmness. There's a lot of people that I talk to, in my coaching practice and, in the trainings that we do in my daily life. There's a lot of people that I talk to that have, are almost at the point of giving up. And that just, in line with what you just said, that just feels like the plan. The plan is to get us to give up. The plan is, a huge part of that plan is to get us to believe that we don't have any impact. And yeah, I'm just feeling, I know this might be a little bit of repetition of what we're saying, but it's just, it's just this cycle. And like, I guess the question I have for you is, so much of what we do is about breaking cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what's something practical that somebody listening can do to start to break this cycle of hopelessness, feeling overwhelmed, and apathy, and giving up, and all of that stuff? What are some things that people can do right now?
Yeah, the first thing that arrived in my mind was developing a sense of gratitude. So our ego is conditioned to see everything that's wrong. So just putting in the context of what we're seeing globally, we're attracted like moths to the flame of conflict and turmoil. And that allows us to have put on the glasses of everything is going to hell in a handbasket. But
Right.
as much as there's, conflict and violence in the world, there's equally beautiful things happening in the world. And so, I know for many, many years, I lived a life of always seeing what was wrong in my friends, what was wrong in myself. And now I counter that energy by really focusing on gratitude. I have a very specific gratitude practice. Every night, I look at how did my ego show up for the day and just be really honest with myself. Not judging it, but just being really honest with myself so I can make the corrections I need to make. But then I focus on what am I grateful for today? There's so many beautiful things that are happening all around us. We're just not conditioned to see them. And so gratitude and being thankful for all the beautiful things in life can serve as a powerful counterbalance to that energy of hopelessness. And the other thing I would say, Martin, and because I have endless well of hope inside of me. I know we are going to build a new world. That is going to happen. I just, I think it's been important for me to just really focus on the growth within me, right? And as I focus on the growth within me, which has been amazing. Like when I look at where I've been in my life and where I've come to and where I'm going to continue to go to, that tells me that every one of us can grow. And so, putting it back in the context of this global conflict, if I can grow out of alcoholism and the trauma I experienced as a child, then we can collectively grow as a human family and begin to treat each other with the gentleness, love, respect, and care and warmth that we all deserve. So that's just a couple thoughts that can come to mind for me. Good question, Martin.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. I think it's beautiful. I've felt it as you were saying it. It's amazing. I've been in a practice of gratitude. I've been in a practice of feeling love and sending love to people that are even hard, that are especially hard for me sometimes to feel love for and send love to. And it's amazing how challenging that can feel and how important that is for us to do. And yeah, so I think it's a great offering, Dustin. I think it's a great offering to people. And, I think that, we could have spent this time going, taking a deep dive into the, geopolitical, economic and, analysis of what's happening. But I really appreciate that, that we've sort of veered away from that and into the realm of what we're personally responsible for. And also, just what we put into the world. It's so easy to sit back here and criticize what other people put into the world. And we're not looking really carefully, and we're not being accountable to ourselves about what we're really putting out into the world every day, every moment.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on today and to have this conversation. We want to tell everybody listening that, that this is our offering to you, like everything else, this is our offering. And, we are all filled with a giant wellspring of hope for this world, because I love how you said it, Dustin. If we have examples of how we've been able to change, at the Soul Focus Group, we call it re-engineering our groundwater, our subconscious programming. We know that we are capable. Every one of us is capable of shifting the way that we think and look at the world. And that's really ultimately what gives us hope. So we're just so thankful that you all are on this journey with us. Dustin, we have so many exciting things coming at Soul Focus Group. We want people to come and check out our website, but just talk about some of the things, Dustin, that are upcoming for us.
Well, we have a book that's going to be coming out called The Little Book of Ego. That's going to be phenomenal. Nice. I highly encourage people when it comes to get it. It's going to offer a whole new framework of understanding our assigned ego and how ego works in our lives in such a way to keep us from maximizing and living out our fullest potential and purpose. We have online courses coming up around understanding how racism and the history of racism now lives in our groundwater unconsciously and keeps taking us to places that most of us say consciously we don't want to go over and over. And it's going to offer a set of skills to begin to re-engineer our groundwater, as you just spoke about. We have, of course, the podcast is going to be going to continue on with some really important conversations around spiritual parenting, around leadership, and how we can become more impactful leaders and help build this new world that all of us are seeking, and how we can be leaders in our own family, not just out in the world, but leaders in our own family and our own lives, and really begin to individually and collectively live in our divine purpose and the reason why we all came to this earth. So a lot of exciting stuff to look forward to. One of the things, Mahdi is releasing a lot of videos on YouTube. So I hope people go to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Of course, yes. Our podcasts are coming out on YouTube. Just a lot of exciting stuff. And we're in a nice rhythm and a nice flow of creating and offering our antidote to this world that can sometimes be hostile and mad, to feel, as you said earlier, overwhelming and sometimes hopeless. We are bringing the sunlight into this world.
Right. And, I want to add to what you said too. I want to put in a little plug or a big plug for A Great Desire to Understand Whiteness. Because I think that's really appropriate to what's happening here. Because there's no question that this particular, we could say many, ego is at the root of all of these types of domination, power over conflicts. And this particular one happening in Europe can really be examined through the lens of whiteness. So I would say that, please look for that on our website. You can reach out to me directly at martin@soulfocusedgroup.com. And we're rolling out a new format, and we're very, very excited for it. So we're just excited, to have all of you on board. We love each and every one of you. We care about you. We're so excited that you're on this journey with us. And we ask that even with everything going on, you stay safe, whatever that means for you. You stay well, whatever that means for you. And most of all, please stay soul focused.
Peace.